resistance through the sand, through the rough, tight lies, doesn't matter. It makes you a better player.
A very warm welcome, everybody. This is Squawk Box in our headlines this hour. Deadly clashes on the border between Israel and Gaza leave dozens of Palestinians killed and many more injured as tens of thousands protest against the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem.
Crude prices nearing levels not seen since late 2014, whilst U.S. equities close another session higher in the Dow's longest winning streak since last September.
A reprieve in Rome. Italy's five-star and Lega parties are awarded a few more days to present their leadership proposal to the president.
So, very good morning. We'll kick off the programme this morning by taking a look at the results from Commerzbank, the German bank, telling us that their performance and strategy implementation is on track in the first quarter of 2018. The company delivering what it calls stable revenues of 2.3 billion euros. That stacks up against the first quarter of 2017 at 2.39 billion. So it is a lower number. The company says revenue adjusted for exceptional items, but it would have been slightly higher than in the first quarter of 2017 without those adjustments. The issue for Commerzbank continues to be the issue for the banking industry as a whole here in Germany, the suppression of interest rates by the European Central Bank, of course, and the challenge of improving loan growth. Common Equity Tier 1 ratio in at 13.3%. The bank says we are aiming to resume dividend payments for the financial year 2018 and have made an accrual of 5 cents per share in the first quarter. In terms of the operating profit line coming in at 289 million euros as against the 330 million for the first quarter of 2017, and a net profit line of 250 million, which has just nudged ahead of where they were in the year-ago period. Let's pick up with Annette. She joins us this morning from Frankfurt with a view on the results we're getting out of this bank this morning. Annette, what do you make of what Commerzbank have to say?
Well, actually, if you look at the numbers, they look a little bit better than analysts had expected, at least if you look at the net profit line. Net profit now standing at 250 million euro is ahead of what analysts had expected. This number was 181 million. At the same time, the capital position is a tad weaker than people had expected. Revenues a little bit higher. So probably that is a good bag of numbers we're getting here from Commerzbank. As you were saying, Commerzbank is clearly a play on higher interest rates. It always was, and it is still. And they are keeping on saying that if interest rates are rising, our shares will rise as well, and our income will rise as well. The problem is the interest rate part here, because interest rates are nowhere near to a rise in the Eurozone as it stands now, and that is why we most likely will see a continuing bleak picture of earnings for Commerzbank. Looking at the share price, it is down by some 14% year to date, which is of course a little bit also because Deutsche Bank is performing so poorly, and when Deutsche Bank is doing poor, they are also taking a dip here as well. Looking at the retail market, the picture is not getting better if looking into the future. The competition is growing even. We've just heard yesterday from Goldman Sachs that they're planning on expanding in Germany when it comes to their retail business, which is, I think, quite astonishing.
And in play, lots of talk swirling last year, and there's an activist sitting on the share registry, the third biggest shareholder, Cerberus, but of course the German government at about 15%. So the question is what the German government wants to do with this bank.
Well, the German government clearly wants to exit its stake. The question is, do they want to exit at a loss? Because they need, I've done that calculation once, they need on average a share price of at least 18 euro. Some others are arguing even 25 euro. So there's still a long way to go for those shares until the government can actually exit it without posting a loss on their holding. Having said that, at the same time, you're mentioning it, Cerberus is one of their biggest shareholders. There's a growing fantasy here on the market side that if Deutsche Bank is not managing itself out of their trouble... No way. Not managing out of their troubles, then we also will most likely see a scenario that Commerzbank and Deutsche Bank at the end will have to go together. And that's most likely also what Cerberus is aiming for, having built up that stake in Commerzbank.
And that's excellent. Well done dealing with the riffraff. Well done there, and well done on your reporting as well. What a prat. Okay. God, first Eurovision, now us. Okay, we will be speaking to Stefan Engels. Stefan Engels, the CFO of Commerzbank, 11:40 Central European Time. Just to say as well, it's not good enough. I mean, obviously not good enough, that prat on the street there with Annetta, but also they're lying on this company. I mean, I just look at the performance of this company versus rivals. I mean, Karen, name me a rival. Any rival in Europe?
Deutsche Bank?
Oh, I thought you were going to go for Bankers.
That was a curveball, wasn't it?
Wrong rival.
Straight away. You always go for Santander, just like I always go for ING. What are you doing? Anyway, apart from Deutsche Bank, a lot of the rivals are making good net interest margin. They're making good net interest income. They've got decent price to book across the board, whether it's Santander
or Deutsche
ING.
Bank.
No, not Deutsche Bank. They're the same as Commerzbank. But those aside, other banks are managing to get decent capital levels, decent profitability, and have escaped from the GFC. Why is it that in one of Europe's strongest economies, with the lowest unemployment rate, with a seemingly the best government's situation and an individual situation with the individual personal wealth and what have you, i.e. Germany, that Commerzbank and Deutsche are still in the mire, trading at 0.39 to 0.45 price to book, i.e. undervalued by the market? And you can look at them against virtually any other player in Europe, maybe apart from some of the Greeks and what have you. They are performing way worse than the opposition.
But it's clear why, because they are not exposed to the business segments that have done well through the last year or so. I mean, let's face it, retail, wholesale, investment bank. They're not big investment banking. They're ho-hum in terms of wholesale. They offer the product, but in Germany the problem has always been the competition with the Sparkassen and the regional banks, and they will always undercut the listed banks, Commerzbank and Deutsche Bank. I think it's challenging, and when you look at the messages that have been sent out to the retail banking community, don't give us your deposits. If you do, we may have to give you negative interest rates, or we'll take them, but actually the cost for us holding those deposits is higher than actually the return of having them and reinvesting them in the market.
It's kind of pathetic, isn't it? Because Karen and I have argued about leverage ratios, of all the things we argue about. 3, I'm saying they're too low. 5 is where the US expects their leverage ratios to be. And then we're saying that these banks in Europe, some of the German ones, are underfinanced as well. Well, if they can't multiply that book up, whatever deposit is, without saying, hey, don't give us your deposits, that's kind of pathetic, because this is bread and butter banking. What you do is you have your deposit, and then you multiply it up and lend it, and you make a net interest margin. If that's true, what you're saying is that we can't compete with the Sparkassen, we can't compete with anyone in wholesale, retail, commercial, what have you, then what's the point? It goes back to the old point. I know Karen's desperate to get in, but I can't stop talking. And that is the fact that we are over-banked in Europe.
I think you've raised the point about a comparison to the rest of Europe, and it does go back to the conversation that was swirling around 2017. Will there be consolidation among the German banks? Whether it's a Deutsche Bank with a Commerzbank or some other European player. But if you look at the share register of both Deutsche and Commerzbank, there are very similar shareholders on the share register. I mentioned the 15% that the German government is holding on Commerzbank. That tells you there could be an easy solution. HNA, for instance, on Deutsche Bank, which had been reducing some of its shareholding. So there might be an ability to come up with some form of consolidation, particularly if the levels are much lower on performance than across other European banks.
There's a great existential question is, what is the point of having governments involved in banks? They're only there during the moment of peak crisis to potentially bail them out, but they don't bail out a whole host of other industries, which actually they could finance directly rather than having the dodgy transmission mechanism in the middle. But let's leave that argument aside. What is the point of having banks with government ownership or any shade of government ownership? I would suggest not a lot.
I can't disagree. I mean,
okay.
why should the state be involved in the banking business? Unfortunately, it only ever seems to be involved when there's a crisis and when the bankers need bailing out.
But why didn't they bail out the companies, the car companies, whatever, direct, rather than the transmission mechanism?
I think they did, didn't they, in the States?
In the States, yes. Yeah.
I just point out that there have also been, inflows into some of the European markets in recent weeks. I mean, 7 straight weeks of gains across on some of the stock markets. Yet, what have you got in some of these big banks? No reversal of the decline so far this year. So something is wrong in the perception for investors as well. Yeah,
fabulous. Let's move on to Allianz as well. Allianz done nothing this year, actually. Year to date, down 0.6%. Gives you a yield of 4.2%. You might be interested to know. Right, Allianz has come in with first quarter results. They say, the company says itself, signal good start into 2018, on track to meet new targets. First quarter 2018 operating profit down 6%, or 176 million euros, to 2.8 billion euros. The figure that they were looking for was 2.79. I think we'll call that 2.8. So pretty much in line with expectations. Third-party net inflows, very strong actually, 20.9 billion euros in the first quarter. Combined ratio improved by 0.8 percentage points to 94.8. And as you all know by now, the lower the figure goes, the better. So profitable business, 94.8, not stellar, but profitable. Allianz on track to meet its 2018 performance targets.
Let's push on. Palestinian health officials say dozens are dead and thousands have been injured on the border of Gaza and Israel. This after Israeli troops opened fire on tens of thousands of protesters demonstrating against the opening of a high-profile U.S. embassy in Jerusalem by the Trump administration. The violence marked the bloodiest single day in Palestine since 2014. The bloodshed prompted an international outcry with calls for restraint from a number of European leaders. Israel has described the action as self-defense. Let's get out to Hadley for more in Abu Dhabi. Hadley, this is one of the greatest fears for many international watchers, that there would be violence on the back of this move of the U.S. Embassy.
Absolutely, Karen, and it's difficult to see that there wouldn't be more violence today, especially considering this is the anniversary of the day that the Palestinians were really pushed out of that country, of their country, also known as the Nakba. Now, it's interesting, of course, to note that given the fact that we've seen so much cooperation over the last several years in particular, under the table really, between Israel and these Gulf Arab states, there was, of course, a pushback initially on this decision that President Trump had made about moving that embassy to Jerusalem. We haven't heard too much about it since. Of course, this is a region that has to keep their ear to the Arab Street while at the same time dealing with the realities on the ground, which are, of course, that Israel and the United States are their ally when it comes to Iran. Now, let's listen into some of the sound that we heard over the last 24 hours. The U.S. has kept pretty quiet on what's happening right now over in Israel. But we did hear, of course, from Israel's prime minister. He called the day glorious. Let's listen in.
This is history. President Trump, by recognizing history, you have made history. Today, the embassy of the most powerful nation on earth, our greatest ally, the United States of America, today its embassy opened here.
Now, for a country and a prime minister that for so many years now has seemed to get the optics really, really right when it comes to the message that they're really trying to send to the rest of the world, we've seen that really taper off in the last couple of years, particularly with what we saw yesterday with these very violent images juxtaposed with the setting there with the president's daughter and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, of course, and his daughter Ivanka sitting there on the sidelines. We also saw in the audience people like the former Senator Joe Lieberman, who also, of course, was a vice presidential running mate to Al Gore several years ago, with a lot of high-profile profile people in that audience. But whether or not this is going to actually play well globally, I mean, we've already heard an international outcry, and certainly from these European countries that for so many years now have been trying to pressure Israel as well. This can't be good news for the administration in Tel Aviv. Let's listen in to what the Palestinians observer to the UN had to say.
We condemn in the strongest term this atrocity by the Israeli occupying forces using this massive firepower against civilians who have the right to demonstrate peacefully, and they have been demonstrating peacefully. We condemn this action in the strongest possible term. We demand that this action to be stopped immediately, and we want those responsible to be brought to justice from the Israeli side, because this is not allowed under the provisions of international law.
And of course, the violence that we're seeing there does play into the broader narrative of instability in the Middle East, though of course it's difficult to see how that will actually impact markets, at least in the short term. Certainly the question, of course, going forward is, with so much progress that seems to have been made between these Gulf Arab countries and the Trump administration, how damaging this is going to be to their future plans, not just when we talk about OPEC, non-OPEC agreements, of course, but also when we talk about the Iran nuclear deal and, of course, the security of these Gulf Arab countries within this context of this Shia crescent that what I'm bringing up again and again, of course, with Tehran to Damascus to Beirut. So a lot of questions, guys, on how this will actually impact things longer term.
Hadley, if our viewers are watching and they're not familiar with the nuances like you are of the Middle East, in my view, and they're watching from a distance, where is the biggest flashpoint going forward? I mean, we're looking at the horrendous death toll yesterday, and indeed looking at the Israel situation, one might think there. But is it the Iran situation? Is it in Syria at the moment? Where is the biggest danger for the world, actually, of this accelerating and exacerbating and getting out of hand?
I think, Steve, you have to look at this in terms of the broad picture, because there are so many flashpoints. I don't think there isn't just one. I mean, we've got what's happening in Israel today. We also had what happened yesterday in these Iraqi elections. Very few people really talking about this. You had Muqtada al-Sadr, a man that was on the U.S. most wanted list, of course, for several years, now seemingly in conjunction with the Saudis. I mean, there's a lot of shifting of these movements, these tectonic shifts, I think, in terms of the geopolitics here. And I don't think it's just one flashpoint. I think it's a confluence of events. I think that folks are going to really have to keep a closer eye on. I mean, this is we only have a 24-hour news cycle, but the fact that we weren't really focusing on what was happening in Iraq is a bigger question, because, as you know, we've interviewed now 3 or 4 times the Prime Minister of Iraq, Haider al-Abadi. He's talked a lot about the economics of that country and about how they have to combat corruption and how dangerous that could be. Now, the question, of course, now is, as they seem to be moving further away from the Iranian camp, the Shia camp, and more into the hands of the Saudis, how that's going to really play out, guys.
Hadley, thank you very much for bringing us the latest. And just a pointer, you can head to CNBC.com to find out why Citi thinks rising oil prices could soon create a hostile environment for stocks.
ThyssenKrupp has been going through a transformation program to reduce its exposure to steel. We're going to talk to the company very shortly as we get the latest numbers from the business. Stay with us. We'll be right back.